ourselves a hot tune-up kit of some new spark plugs, spark plug wire. Not convinced that's really the problem, but let's start with that. Big John, say hi.
Howdy, howdy.
Big John had to radio in for help on this one.
What do you think is going to happen with these new spark plugs?
I think it's still going to run with ether. But will it run without ether? That is the question. What do you think is going to happen, Big John?
I think it's going to run like a dime.
I don't know about all that. We definitely got a little oil leakage to the floor. We have to do a little investigating on where that's coming from. I'd like to go outside and do a little washing.
Think any seafoam through the carburetor would help?
Well, seeing as we're running on propane, that might be hard. I did see something about draining tar out of the regulator. Don't know anything about that. These don't look too hateful. They don't look like they were put in yesterday.
So how does it like a governor work on a propane?
Well,
system?
you have a mixer, which is kind of like carburetor-ish, in that it's got there's still a throttle plate, and I don't know how exactly it meters the propane, but I think it has something to do with, there's like a sense line. This guy comes around and it comes to the regulator / evaporator. And then I think in the mixer there may be some sort of a throttle for the propane, but don't quote me on that. We're gonna have to do a little research, figure this out. That one's got the right angle plug on number 4. My new plug wires don't have that feature. They're all straight ends. Let's try to figure out what we should gap these at. I don't know if they're pre-gapped anything more or less good enough for who it's for. Do a little Googling. So thanks to Google, 32 thousandths is the correct gap for these. We have our handy dandy gapping tool here. These seem to be very close to that. When I can bring it in just a little bit. The old ones seem to have a pretty giant gap, and that is like 50 thousandths. So maybe that's part of it. Try not to get too much dirt in the cylinder or under the gasket. But we'll just hope for the best at the end of the day. Let's do it 3 more times. Too bad my light fell down to the floor. Hopefully you guys can see in the dark. We really need to upgrade the LED light package in here, don't we, Big John?
Yeah. What kind of studio lights do you think you should get?
All of them.
5000K, 4100K.
5,000 watt. Will the straight hookup work? Oh yeah. Just don't have much extra wire at all. When it's string bean tight, you know it's good. I think a new distributor cap and rotor would be in order for this unit too, but I didn't find those yet. We will. Need to figure out what forklift this engine was in order parts for that. Alright, new plugs and wires are in. So that is the mixer carburetor-ish thing that you can barely see. Where is the oil filter? Because while I'm standing at the auto parts store, I came up with a Wix number, which they could cross to that guy. I don't even see it yet. We'll figure it out. Just gotta crawl underneath her here and you find the oil filter that hasn't been touched in a lot of years. The bottom of the mixer carburetor doodad. I also think it has a manual choke. That's what part of that is. You see the throttle, but you also see the choke. And there's a knob that looks chokish on the dash. And I think it's all stuck. But I don't think you should need the choke when you're running on propane like we have been doing. I would imagine though that this is where the propane is coming in, is that hose and that little adjustment doodad. And then this is just your regular carburetor that we're not using at the moment because we need to fight our battles one at a time. But let's see if the new spark plugs made any difference. So it looks like there's a little bit of antifreeze on the floor on this side, and I don't know if this used to be some sort of an oil cooler and now that's plugged off, but you can see it's dripping some antifreeze over there. A little antifreeze on the floor there, so I don't know what we have going on. I'm gonna have to do a little investigating and repair on that. It was low on coolant. I added that, but evidently that's why. Better than it going through the head gasket. All right, we are free of any wrench rolls sitting in this area, so let's see if she'll start. Maybe not completely dead. Not happy. Seems like we still have a propane injection issue. Really doesn't seem to run any different than it did, proving that your terrible looking spark plugs are just fine. So I'm still trying to get this thing running better at an idle. It runs well anywhere off idle. Don't really know what to make of that. All I can think to do is start turning screws and hope for the best. Where the propane comes into the intake pipe, which is before the carburetor, before the throttle of the carburetor, there's one main screw there. Gonna mess with that, see what happens. I really doubt that anything in the carburetor air flap is messing with us because we're not running it on gas, so none of the jets and everything matter, obviously. But if it was just like an idle adjustment, it would be not wanting to come down or falling way too low before it shuts off. I think that it should run lower RPM, like the normal idle. The idle's probably not screwed up. So it could either be the whole diaphragm setup in the evaporator is not letting gas through at certain times as that sense line works. There's like a vacuum sense line to turn the gas on, or that main jet. So I don't know. Let's start turning screws, probably make it worse. Another thing I found is that the evaporator apparently will accumulate oil, like some sort of a condensate out of the propane over time. And there's a little plug you take out of the bottom of the evaporator to drain this. You're supposed to do it warm. I'm trying to do as much as I can before I get this thing hot and burn the crap out of myself. So I did feel there's a little bit of a little pipe plug at the bottom of that evaporator. Grab a socket set. I'm gonna try to pull that out and see if anything comes out. So it appears what we're taking off here are the mounting bolts for this whole evaporator, which that's fine. It's probably not a bad idea to get it up out of there and actually see what we're working with. I also need to put the solenoid valve back on that I took off. This is pretty dangerous running it like this because if you forget to turn the propane off in the tank, you're potentially dumping propane into the shop. Plug wire out of the way. Maybe that's the old drainage plug right there. When I took this off, when we looked at it, and I need to try to find a screw because there's still a screw in Illinois that hit the ground that day. If you don't see it sitting right here, it's probably gone. But we might end up pulling this back apart and giving it some overall love. Well, that's the coolant side of the equation. It's not that one. Maybe I'll just take this cover back off now that we're not in a panic hurry, and having it out of there allows you to see what's happening a lot better. So that kind of clips itself down on there. Propane comes in here at high pressure and is leaving out of this guy. These two are your coolant lines that are just kind of circulating through there to keep this from freezing up as it is evaporating the propane. I don't know if it's good, bad, or otherwise to take this diaphragm off. What kind of hurt we're this far? I'm sure some of you were just laughing hysterically at my lack of knowledge of this, and I'm sorry. We're going to figure it out one way or another, though, I can tell you that. Hopefully we don't launch too many parts out in the process. There's a spring behind that guy. Kind of hoping to not take those all the way out. Alrighty. At least we'll have the video when I go to put this back together. Of course, buying a whole brand new evaporator is probably not the most expensive thing in the world. So that's an adjustment screw there. It would adjust how hard that spring pushes. That bolt there gets you into that passage. And that would more or less start and stop the propane, I think, from coming through that hole. That seal right there. So when that's in the down position, that's sealed off, and when this lets it open, that lets the propane in, I think. I think that's really all that we have going on there. Uh-oh. That little baby spring just hit the floor. Whoopsies. And I about stabbed a hole in that. So the fact that this thing held pressure this whole time without the solenoid valve really makes me think that that seat is pretty good in doing what it's supposed to do. And there's just a little bit of gunk down there, nothing too crazy. Another spring. If I crack the propane on, I guess we'll verify my thought of it coming out of that hole. Not sure if you can see it on video or not. I can't really tell now. Looking at it, I'd think it pretty well must have been. The sense line is coming in up here, but that sense line must somehow connect to the bottom of that diaphragm, this little guy here. And basically when the engine's under a heavy vacuum, that would pull. I'm not sure which way you'd want it to go or which way it would go. So this is what I have deciphered, and I could be totally wrong. My next step is to find the tag on this thing and see if I can find the manufacturer of this evaporator and if they have a book, because right now I don't have anything. But let's play the game, figure out some assumptions, and then see if we can find documentation. So this spring is on this little diaphragm, and it's in here, and its constant job, it's pushing out, which closes the gas off down here. There's a sense line, this little hole here, it is tied to manifold vacuum. So if the throttle is closed, this is going to be under high vacuum. So what that's going to do is if there's more vacuum in here, this little diaphragm pulls down, and that gives it more propane in this area. So I think that's basically a balancing act of how much vacuum there is. It gives it a little more gas under super high vacuum. This screw pushes on this little hairpin spring to basically offset that, because I feel like you have to have a little bit of a leak of propane getting past this all the time, or else it's never going to run. So like at high vacuum, it obviously gives it gas, but under no vacuum, you don't want no gas, is kind of where my thought is. So as this thing is fluctuating, finding its happy spot of idle, this thing moving and everything, this adjustment screw has to be some sort of like idle mixture. I think the big screw down where this vapor hose goes into in front of the carburetor is like your power screw. So my guess is if all this is cleaned out, this screw right here is what you would adjust to find like that happy medium in the idle. And that's probably why we're not getting enough gas, that we have to hit it with ether. It'll start and it'll run faster RPM, but it won't idle right. Is my belief is this needs to go in, which would try to give it a little bit more, basically favor the balance with this idle vacuum to give it a little bit more gas during those high vacuum times. But I want to clean this up. I think I see where there's a tag on the back. I want to clean that up and we'll go from there. The big diaphragm, I guess let's back that up. We also have this big diaphragm, and what it does is it hooks, that hole hooks on this little throttle sleeve doohickey. And it has some more help, I think, with just regulating the pressure, because if you have more pressure of propane gas in this area, it's going to push up, which basically that shuts this. So this little diaphragm is basically the sense from the engine and how the vacuum affects how much gas it's getting. This big diaphragm is like your pressure regulator per se, where it's just trying to fight for a constant pressure out here. Then it basically lets the throttle plate decide how much air and propane is going in. As I think about this, the manifold vacuum pressure here, if you hammer down your full throttle, so there's no vacuum here helping the cause, this is going to have pressure, I guess you'd say. It's going to be zero, it's not doing anything. It's fully just whatever the pressure regulator wants it to do. When you're at a high vacuum state, like off the throttle, it's going to help pull this down. And so I think what that's going to do is increase the gas pressure at idle, which would kind of richen up the mixture at idle. I guess is kind of at the end what we would say is happening there. So, I don't know. Let's see if we can find a tag, find a manual, and see if I'm an idiot or if I'm on the right track. Either way, we're going to clean this up, put it back together, and I think I want to start playing with this screw here. Ether is just so universal. Is this a tag? It is a tag. Not a very legible tag, but it is a tag. It is the Beam Model 60. How about that? Let's see what we can find on the old Beam Model 60 evaporator. All right, back over here on our crane workbench. Can actually stand to touch this thing now. I don't know, I'm not sure what the spring is like under here. So I'm gonna just be easy on these ones. Okay. Nothing hard. We're not gonna die. I just don't want to take a brake chamber apart and get this thing to the face. Why are we taking this apart? Really don't know. Just kind of checking it out and seeing if everything looks okay. Making sure it's not full of crud. Nothing there. Looks too bad. Looks all good. Hoping cleaning fluid and whatever material these diaphragms are isn't hating each other. There was, you can see a little bit of that grease. I don't know if that's from when this thing was assembled or what. Or if that is the stuff. I'm really trying not to destroy this, mainly because I don't have a rebuild kit. And I'd kind of like to play with this thing. A little more goop hanging out in here. Nothing really makes me think it wouldn't have worked properly though. It's honestly probably as simple as adjusting that idle screw if I had to guess what we have going on here. There's basically another kind of version of what's on the other side where this has to be pushed in to let the gas through. This must be the initial inlet. So this is where the gas comes in over here. Our solenoid valve should be right here. We'll put that back. But the gas comes down, comes in here. This will be its first pressure drop down to some intermediate pressure. There's like a chamber there where the gas would go through that port, up and through this little guy. And that's where the lever on this side lets it out and you have your second pressure drop. That's where the gas comes out and the lever that's here has control over this pressure, which is your second pressure drop. So basically we're not going from tank pressure to feed pressure all in one go. It's a dual stage. And then you have your vacuum block off doing something magic of shutting this off. So if you leave the tank on and you don't have a solenoid valve like me, this area had pressure at all times. Well, let's clean it up, put it back together, and see if we can adjust it. Because I don't see anything here glaringly wrong. I guess I'll pull these off while we're this far down the road. Weird that wasn't tight at all. I doubt that would matter any, but it wasn't tight. And again, you have sort of this rubber seal surface. And this is machined with like a little bit of a cone to it down here where it can close that off. So blowing air through there, comes right out there. No big deal. Pretty much all as you would expect. This spring here lives there, and that's what's pushing on the back side of that, basically keeping it shut. Guess we'll take this back over to the parts washer while we're this far and scrub that area out. Alright, good enough for who it's for. Alright, just kind of wiped all these parts and pieces down. Okay, it goes like that with the spring holding him. And then you have this fella. Goes across there. I guess you don't have any adjustment on that primary because I don't see, you can't turn anything to move the pressure on that screw. Oh, your adjustment comes from, you have another spring. This spring counteracts it from the backside. And if you take this nut off, there must be an adjustment there. We're not going to mess with that. Lay this diaphragm back. Can't really get it backwards because you have that hole there. That hole goes directly across, so that's again some sort of a sense port. So this hole here is the backside of this diaphragm. I'm trying to wrap my head around. The more pressure you have in this area, the more it's above trying to push this open to give it even more pressure. But I think that has to do with the balance of the diaphragm on this side. Don't know. We're just going to start being that dumb guy who just puts it back together and shuts up. So this cover goes on here. It's in there. And this only goes one way because of the width of those holes, which is that way. And then this fella sits on top of there like that. So if we push this down and put our finger over the vacuum port here, you can see it stays down. That's how we're verifying that there's no vacuum leaks there. and the spring pushes it up. So that's good. Next piece is our low pressure shutoff valve. Maybe we'll just leave it alone. We'll leave well enough alone for the time being. See, we have to tighten this down, and then that slips over that little hole there. And this is what I was saying, where this spring, that little rod, I believe its whole job is to help open this. So when you screw this guy in, you're giving it more gas. That goes like that. And where does this spring need to go? Oh, where do you go? Rewind the footage. So thanks to having this on film. So you guys should film stuff. There's a spring. I can see the detent for it between these two screws. And it's trying to force this thing up and closed. Now my only question is, do I have the right spring in the right place? Because they are indeed different sizes. Yeah, it seems reasonable. That makes sense, because now that is definitely shutting this off. So even if you pull a vacuum on this, there may not be propane unless you have the right pressure you need here. And the further you screw this idle screw in, the more gas you're going to have at idle. So now we're going to slip this dude back up on there and put this cover plate back on. It does have like a little vent hole, so we'll put that towards the bottom. And I need to try to come up with one more screw. My fear is, after all of this, I don't know that we really did anything. We saw things, we cleaned a little bit of crap out. I don't know that there was anything in there to make a difference. But we learned something together. We learned that we still don't know what we don't know. So it appears to be a 1032. We fortunately happen to have one, even in the flathead variety. Alrighty, slap her back in there. What's a better way to determine if this solenoid valve will work than hooking it up and trying it? Contact. Definitely seemed to be a no-go. Just a small leak where I didn't really tighten that fitting. Well, being how that vacuum thing works, I don't know that our solenoid works. I grab a meter, see if we have power. Just can't find a good ground anywhere these days. I don't think we have power though. Alright, so I've learned a few more things here. That guy there is basically a vacuum safety. And what that does is the power has to pass through that switch, and the only way it allows power to go through is if there's a little bit of vacuum, which means the engine's running. The other way it can activate, because obviously you need propane to start, is when you hit the starter key. That's what the third wire does. It basically directly gives power to the solenoid. So like right now the power's off, this is all hooked up. If you key on, nothing's going to come out. If you hit the starter, propane should come out. That way, if the engine dies when you're not around, that'll shut off the solenoid valve even with the key still on in an indoor environment. So I'm going to give that a little charge, hit the starter, and see if it comes out. And it does. So the solenoid is working properly. If it starts and then dies after we let off a key, we'll know that we have a problem with the vacuum, and that's what this vacuum line is right here. That makes me think that our other vacuum sense line going there is literally the same thing, just has to have vacuum in order to run. There's no real sensing there, but I'm not sure. So I took this out, cleaned it, taped it, put it back in, cleaned and taped the other side as well. I'm ready to throw that back in the regulator evaporator and get that all mounted back in, hooked back up. We verified our power's working. Our vacuum switch override works to the starter anyway. We don't know for sure if the vacuum part works, but we'll figure that out. So once we get it back in, I'm gonna start tweaking the idle screw on the regulator, see if we can get it run a little better. I guess I'll start on ether again and work our way back down to see if we can get it running in an idle. It's probably the easier way to go about it. I think the proper way is you actually measure the carbon monoxide that you're putting out the exhaust, and basically you're just changing how rich or lean it is at that point. Don't have a carbon monoxide tester, so if it runs, I'm happy. Hopefully I don't die. Alrighty. I'll put the solenoid back on this dude when it was easy. We have the vacuum sense, our vapor outlet, high pressure inlet, and then these are our two heater hoses. And these are the 2/4 inch bolts that mount to that bracket down there. I haven't figured out what this wire is yet. This is our power wire to the solenoid. I think the ground was just hooked on one of these screws here. I'll have to yank them and do that. This is our idle adjustment screw. Really isn't hard to get to when it's not covered with grease. And good old-fashioned heater hoses. Hook this ground for the solenoid up right here. Power wire, power, car power. We'll neaten this all up at a later date, don't you worry. And then our high pressure line hooks in here. This whole safety vacuum dealio should definitely be mounted onto that bracket, so we'll have to try to find some screws for that next. I think part of it is the line is strung tight, so really we need to get a little more vacuumage line. Future upgrade, you know what I mean? It's a work in progress, Crane, really. And are we saying we want more gas or less gas? Let's try more. Half turn. 1 turn of more gas coming at you. Round 22. No way! Oh, couldn't have been that easy. Kind of makes me think it's not getting the constant power. Yeah, like if we'd hold the starter, would it keep running? Yep. Something going on with that vacuum switch dealio. It sure did run nice. I wonder if it was a matter of turning that screw in 1 turn or if we actually cleaned something up. But right now, I need to change that wiring to just get us ignition power. And we're not going to have that magical shutoff feature for right now. So the way I plan on cheater moding this is which wire had power. Well, that's the one coming over the switch. That must be the starter. This one has power right now. So I think what I'll do, because basically the way this works, when we hit the starter key, it's getting power from here to here. But there's never vacuum to close power from here to here. And obviously these two aren't connected, because if they were, the starter would never shut off. So what I'm going to do is take this wire to the solenoid valve and hook it directly to the ignition wire here. That way it'll just be when you key on, the solenoid valve kicks on. And when you key off, the solenoid valve kicks off. I think we're going to have to do something with that LMI before it drives you insane. The beeping. The Morse code beeps. If you knew Morse code, you'd already know that. Well, there goes one screw. We only get one chance. Beep, 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 beep. Shorthand. Beep. There was something already there. That's interesting. Probably should have shut the ignition off, because this wire right here is hot right now. Try not to zap anything. Okay, so you can hear that, the solenoid clicking, because it has 12 volts now. I'm just going to land it back on this switch and use it like a terminal. That is, if I manage to not drop it. Oh, there it is. Beep, 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 beep. All right. I bet it'll run like a top now. Man, look at that idle. Let's see if she'll fire back up that easy. Oh, ho, ho. Sweet! Running like a top. Next thing I know we're lacking is the down on the back outriggers. I think the valve bank is in here with the solenoids and stuff, but I'm not sure. Moment of truth. Maybe. Looks like some solenoid valvey stuff. We also have a nice old wasp's nest. You can see down there to the drive axle on the front there. A little pressure washer wouldn't hurt any of this at all. We also have some accumulators over here, it looks like. Wonder what we are cushioning. Been a couple minutes since that was off of there. The outriggers, you can see the steel lines running the whole machine, so they're probably these guys, like those lines down there. I mean, it could be as simple as wiggling the right thing. I really need to find a service manual for this unit. So I believe this one is the front outrigger up and down, and that one is the back outrigger up and down. I'm gonna go ahead and hit the switches, see if I can see them shake or anything to verify. That's all the front. Now I'm going to try the back. Can't go down. That's attempting to go up. So I'm just trying to troubleshoot which solenoid valve are the back outriggers actuated by, and then I'm going to try to see, is it getting power or is it the solenoid itself that's the issue? If I was a betting man, I'd say the solenoid's fine and it's either the switch or the wiring. Probably the wiring. Some of this is kind of hard to show, but I thought you guys would appreciate it. trying to trace down which solenoid is the outrigger up and down versus the in and out. This cylinder here is what kind of like tips that out. But you can see that the return side of the cylinder, basically pull the outrigger in, is joined up with what must be the lift the outrigger side of the outrigger cylinder. So you only have 3 hoses per setup of 2 two-way cylinders. So it looks like tracing hoses around. This is your lift up and down, pick the machine up hose on the front. We're on the front right now. And it goes down to this hose, this first solenoid, that lifts the front of the machine up, and that's working fine. The push the outrigger out circuit is this hose, which comes tees with the right-hand front side and comes up here and is the second solenoid. So basically we have push down in the front, extend in the front. The combined circuit of suck this in and lift the outrigger up, it runs up here, this hose here, and it runs back to that solenoid valve you see up there. So the back outriggers, these hoses run all the way up from the back of the machine. I believe we just have a copy of what we have in the front. We have the push the outriggers out and the push the outriggers down solenoid valve. They have a third one, of course, for the lifting and pulling in, and it is that guy right there, I do believe. But I need to trace it, I guess, to be fair. And the way that this thing can do 4 different functions with only 3 valves is if you're wanting to suck in but not lift up, or you're wanting to lift up without suck in, you're just controlling which valves you open on the return side, and that allows you to have 4 functions with 3 valves. So I thought that was cool. I guess they did that as a money savings, I would have to think, more than anything. Save some hoses and save some valves. But now I need to see, are we getting power to both of these? I need to verify, A, that this is what I think it is as far as going down. I think this solenoid would be push the back outriggers down. But let's see what we can figure out. New boom mic seems to work pretty well. Big John couldn't even hear this scrap. Oh, that's tiny. Tiny hooked me up. I said, is it what Larson Farms has? She's like, I tried. Because apparently that message made it back to her. So with the key on, you can hear this thing clicking solenoids when you flip that switch both ways. So I don't know if that's the one return and not the one giving it pressure. Let's see what we can find. So Yogi helped me out. We got the meter hooked up to the solenoid valve bank. It's the one all the way on the right, which I believe is the back outrigger down. But let's find out. Or find out if it's getting power. It is getting power. Up and down. Right, up and down, that guy's getting power. But when you go up, you can hear this other solenoid click. Maybe it's the problem is in this solenoid up top here. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, is that pressure? And then if so, when you're coming up, does the pressure just push over the relief that's set on this bank? Well, if this is the one pushing down, that wouldn't make sense. I'm confused. So what I've done right now is I've disconnected the solenoid valve that's on this side that we know is hooked to the hose that shoves this down. And I've also left the one disconnected on the right side solenoid bank, which is the one that lowers the back down. And yeah, I'll show you the response here. When I hit the button to go down with them in the front, it goes over relief. When I hit the button to go down with them in the back, it doesn't do anything. And what that tells me is we have an issue. I need to do something with that LMI. But what that tells me is I think it's this two-way valve that either gives pressure or gives tank dump to that whole stack of valves down there. Something's going on with it or the power to it. So let's dig into that. So this is our solenoid, and it appears what it does is give either pressure or let it drain to that bank of 4 solenoids. That's why they had to split off the in and out to this other, the one leg of the in and out to this other solenoid here and here. So from what I can tell, what we have an issue with is the pressure side. Well, that still doesn't make sense. I need to draw this out. So this is more or less a drawing, a very crude drawing of what we have going on. This bank of 4 solenoids that's at the front of the machine, that gets the top of the up and down of the front and the inside of the in and out. It also gets the top of the back and the inside of the in and out on the back. All these 4 solenoids do is turn on or off, and they open up. This connects to another two-way, which either gives you to pressure or tank. The front's working. So what that tells me is this two-way solenoid valve that I was suspecting, and that's why I got confused as I was talking about this, it's doing everything it needs to do. But I can't hear it. Right now I have this and this unplugged, and it basically, when you hit the top toggle switch for the front or the bottom for the back, they should do the same thing. This should turn on and this should pressurize. This should open or this should pressurize, depending on which switch you're hitting. Because this one works and this one doesn't, that makes me think we either have a relay or a switch issue. And really, I think it has to be a relay kind of a thing, because the switch is giving power to this solenoid valve, but it's not giving power to this solenoid valve. So somehow when you hit that switch, it hits both this and this, but when you hit the other switch, it hits this and this. So I'm not sure what they're using for relays to disconnect this wire and this wire. Otherwise, those switches would do the same job if you didn't have relays disconnecting them. So somehow there's like a relay connecting this solenoid valve and this solenoid valve when you hit the one switch and not this one. So the switch must just run to a coil which has like a double pole relay that turns this on and this on, so that when it's off you can turn this on and this on without turning that on. So I think there's probably a relay issue. Let's dive into the electrical, which again we don't have schematics for. Awesome. So which one of these 500 relays is our problem? None of these are double pole either. They're just a coil and a normally open and normally closed and common. So when the switch hits, it must activate multiple relays depending on which one it needs. So if only I had a friend or the ability to reach through this glass. I wonder if that one slides. No, that one definitely doesn't slide. We're gonna have to figure out how we can tell which one clicks when we move switches. Well, maybe let's play the game of, are any of these even anything to do with it? Relay 1, relay 2, relay 3, relay 4, and relay 5 for starters. Relay 1 must be like the ignition switch. Let's put you back. Evidently it was not. Round 2. I guess we can just leave the key on and see which one makes it beep. Not that one. But is that the hootenanny up and down? Nope. That one turns on the LMI. And all of those. I wonder if there could be something going on in there behind that switch plate. Trigger breaker 6 is the one you want to pull to not lose your mind. That must not be these relays that are doing that job. So the next place we're going to tear apart is inside the dash. I'm going to pull this turn signal shifter thingy off, which is just these couple of screws with a couple plugs. And then we can take this all off. And maybe before I get too carried away, we don't even have to do that. Because there's just this one hex head screw, another one in that corner, and then this comes off, and I have no idea what's behind door number 3. So the valve is working, and I can tell you that because of the way that it is. In that schematic I drew, if you could see it, you'd understand. It's a control issue because under certain times the solenoid valve I need is working with other switches. It's the same valve. And that's where I'm trying to wrap my head around where that connection is made. I guess that does have to come off. I got the shifter out of the way here. Let's see what craziness. Oh my God. We have officially all the wires. So I guess you know what this means is they're doing this with double pole, double throw switches to get the power where it needs to go. Interesting. Well, the good news is it's probably just like one bad contact or one wire that came off in here. Let's start trying to track stuff down. Well, you know what? Look at that. We're missing a wire on that switch right there. And funny enough, rear down would be there. Those two are just kind of off and unhooked. What do you think the odds are that they go there? Those wires were already on a jumper, just like the one on that one. Hey, it's clicking both ways now. I bet you that was the problem. Let's hook up those solenoids down below and see if that fixed it. This connector is very loose. I'm going to give it a little bit of a smashing. See if we can tighten it up so it doesn't fall back off there again. It might have been working before it rode home on that horrible ride of the gooseneck. And then it came off. Alright, that's hooked back up. Let's do that and try her. Now, got to put the shifter back on. It doesn't see it as neutral. Try her now. Oh man, doesn't even turn over. All right, moment of truth. Rear one. Does it go down? It goes down. Sweet. Can't beat that. Yogi, why do you have half a paper towel roll? I'm scared to look over there. Oh, okay, there's not paper towels everywhere. But how about that, Yogi? That was our last piece of the puzzle. I think now we just got some little leaks and things like that. Pressure washing, oil change, grease, minor service and details. And we're ready to do stuff. Like work on Mini-Max stuff. I don't really know what this holds. I'd say somewhere in the 4 to 6 quart range. Just have to keep on checking. Just above the ad right now. We also have to fill that oil filter, which is probably another quart. Looking like we're right about on the full money. I'll start it and fill that oil filter and we'll go from there. while the weight is off of this with the outriggers, I think it's an opportune time to get down here and give her a little greasing. I always believed in greasing kingpins with the weight off the tire so that it gets greased properly, and I think this kind of falls under that same category with these knuckles. Doesn't seem that it has a greasable tie rod end. Got the old universally here. I'd say it's been some time since much of this was greased. Airing them. I already had 90. This looks kind of low. They rate them at 120. Probably gonna have to play the cycle the air compressor game to make that happen. So our next problem to address is the leaky antifreeze situation. You can see way down in there, this was the transmission cooler. The transmission would hook up here and on this side, and it would cool the transmission with the lower radiator hose, the coolest part of the antifreeze in the circuit. But evidently, that transmission cooler failed because antifreeze is coming out one of the transmission lines, which should never be there. So it must have at some point in time been putting antifreeze in the transmission oil or vice versa. Their little plug deals don't seem to be working, so I'm going to see if I can either get that connection better or maybe just take it off and put a loop of heater hose from one side to the other. That way it all just has coolant. Their new transmission cooler, they added onto these hoses, which doesn't really appear to be leaking, and then added in this sweet factory option air to transmission oil cooler. So at least it is getting some cooling still. Probably just fine for all we'll ever do with her. So I got down here where I could take off their little cap package, and it was just very loose. So I tightened it all up, and it seems like it quit dripping. Got one there, and the other one's kind of behind here. This is the transmission cooler, as I mentioned. I also just checked these other hose clamps. I mean, the hoses don't look great, but they don't look terrible. I think we're gonna try it. See if we can send it. So I guess the beepy LMI does kind of work still because I had to put the circuit breaker back in for it or else we didn't have boom up or load down. So we got that hooked back up. I need to try to investigate. Apparently it is somewhat working if it evidently allows the solenoid valve to operate the hoist and the boom. So maybe we can find a parts one of those or tear into that in the future and see if we can figure out why the screen is not happy and the buzzer continuously beeps. Trying to lose any fingers. think, Lainey? Hi! Much better than when we unloaded her and dumped her in here. I think that door is gonna have to go for most uses. Curious to try out the 4-wheel steer package. Oh, look at that! Great success! Maiden voyage was a go. Naturally, we're gonna have to put all the boom out just to see what it looks like. So I pivoted the jib in. Now we put these 2 pins in. I think that thing should be adjusted so that when you're sucked all the way in, the jib is happy. Now we pull this pin. Have a jib. You know what I didn't do? Just take this out. Right now the 2-block switch isn't working anyway, so I'm thinking maybe we'll just pull this whole thing off there. It's not helping anything. Alright, this is the key component of don't forget that. Swing the jib out. one time probably ever. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it ought to go in. Round two. Oh, yeah. Look at that. Put this back in the stowed position. Well, let's see what full height looks like. Holy cow. You couldn't even see the top. Jesus. That is awesome. I'm so excited for this thing. So I think we've proven that this crane was a great purchase. It all seems to function well. A few more things to tinker with here and there, but all in all, it's working very well. The next step I'm going to do is buy a proportional remote control system with some servo actuators that will tie directly onto the mechanical sticks. And what that'll do is give us like a belly pack system with the 4 functions of swing, boom, telescope, and hoist, as well as a throttle actuator, so it'll have a dial so you can throttle it up and down, start and stop it remotely. That way when we're doing things like yanking the engine out of this grader, we can easily be over there manipulating the engine just like you can with a service truck crane, but with a little extra capacity. So thank you guys for watching. You'll definitely be seeing more of this in future endeavors, and it'll be a helpful piece to have around. Thanks for watching. Lifted. We had a pretty nice warm day, so I brought the steam Jenny home because all we have on hand normally is cold water, and that's not very fun for grease, so a little help with some hot water. Let's get her cleaned up.